Imagine a city where sin was so intense that God decided to destroy it completely. That was the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But what was really happening inside those cities? What practices led God to bring such severe judgment? Today, you'll uncover shocking details about life in Sodom and Gomorrah and what this story can teach us today. Genesis 13:10-13. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord. Sodom and Gomorrah were thriving economic hubs of their time. Located in a fertile and strategic region, these cities prospered easily. The well-irrigated lands ensured abundant harvests, and trade was booming, attracting visitors and residents from various regions. For outsiders, Sodom and Gomorrah seemed like the ideal place to get rich and live comfortably. However, this material prosperity came with a heavy cost. Wealth quickly fostered greed and arrogance among the residents. They started to believe they were above any moral or spiritual law, living as if nothing could stop them. Ezekiel 16:49. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. This abundance led to wastefulness and selfishness. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah gave themselves over to a life of excess, caring only about their own desires and pleasures. Compassion was replaced by indifference, and social inequalities grew worse. The poor were ignored and the weak were despised. Those without resources were left to fend for themselves, while the wealthy flaunted their possessions and boasted about their achievements. Wealth and power went to their heads, and they began to believe they were invincible. This false sense of security allowed greed to spread into all aspects of society. Business owners cheated to increase profits, and merchants inflated prices to deceive customers. Dishonesty became routine, and truth lost its value. Meanwhile, families also began to fall apart. Relationships became shallow, driven only by self-interest. Respect for elders disappeared, and the moral values that once held society together were crumbling. The relentless pursuit of pleasure and comfort made hard work seem pointless. People idolized wealth, believing it was the key to true happiness. This mindset created a vicious cycle. Greed fueled corruption, and corruption destroyed moral principles. Wealth also encouraged a culture of pride and showmanship. Residents flaunted their riches and looked down on those who had less. Humility was forgotten, and arrogance took over their hearts. People cared only about appearances, living for status, while ignoring honesty and integrity. At the height of their decadence, Sodom and Gomorrah became symbols of excess and injustice. Visitors quickly realized that these cities had no rules or limits. The sense of unrestrained freedom drew even more people in, pushing society closer to complete collapse. Despite their apparent success, Sodom and Gomorrah were teetering on the brink of moral disaster, a downfall that would soon end in tragedy. Genesis 19:4-5. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." This passage reveals a disturbing reality about Sodom and Gomorrah. The relentless pursuit of pleasure had stripped the residents of any respect for others. Sexual immorality, promiscuity, and violent behavior were so common that shame and fear of consequences had disappeared. Family values were completely distorted. Marriage, which should represent love and commitment, was trivialized. Extramarital affairs were common and often encouraged. People sought to satisfy their own desires at any cost, even if it harmed others. Aggressive behavior became part of daily life. Those who tried to live with integrity were mocked and persecuted. The residents didn't just practice evil, they celebrated it, while despising anyone who tried to do what was right. Romans 1:26-28. Paul describes the corruption that results when people turn away from God. This passage shows that when people abandon divine principles, they lose all moral discernment. In Sodom and Gomorrah, this was painfully evident. Sin wasn't just common, it was glorified. Even visitors weren't safe. Travelers passing through Sodom and Gomorrah knew they risked being attacked or assaulted. The cities had become chaotic and dangerous, where cruelty was seen as normal. The thirst for pleasure and the lack of emotional control drove Sodom and Gomorrah to extremes of spiritual corruption. Religious leaders were silenced, and any attempt to correct immoral behavior was met with violence. This moral decay infected all areas of society. The youth adopted the destructive behaviors of adults, and the idea of right and wrong was completely forgotten. Celebrations and festivals that once symbolized joy turned into scenes of debauchery and addiction. Drunkenness and disorder became so common that few realized they were heading towards self-destruction. By this point, things were out of control. Pride, arrogance, and the obsession with pleasure turned Sodom and Gomorrah into symbols of spiritual and social collapse. And it was in this chaotic environment that divine judgment was about to unfold. Amid the wealth and reckless pursuit of pleasure, another problem was growing silently in the streets of Sodom and Gomorrah: violence. Social relationships were breaking down, and respect for others had been replaced by a culture of cruelty and domination. The feeling of impunity encouraged people to act without fear. Street fights were common, and disputes between neighbors often ended in physical assaults. Violence wasn't just an occasional response to conflict, it became a way of life. Genesis 18:20. Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sins so grievous." This passage reveals that the moral corruption in these cities had reached unbearable levels. The outcry mentioned in the Bible refers to the cries of victims suffering from constant abuse and injustice. The wealthy exploited the poor without compassion. Widows and orphans were frequently mistreated and neglected. Instead of being protected, they were targeted for scams and abuse. Political leaders manipulated the law to serve their own interests, while the powerless had no one to defend them. Courtrooms were corrupted, justice became a tool for the powerful, and bribery was common. The right to a fair defense was denied to the most vulnerable. The wealthy always emerged victorious, even when guilty. Gangs and violent groups dominated the streets. Fear became constant, and people avoided going out at night. There were no guarantees of safety. Anyone could be attacked, robbed, or even killed without consequence. Even within families, violence had become routine. Respect between parents and children had vanished. Homes, meant to be places of protection, had turned into environments filled with conflict, shouting, and resentment. Travelers passing through Sodom and Gomorrah were frequent victims of violence and theft. Visitors were seen as easy targets and were often ambushed. Many who tried to conduct business or seek shelter ended up brutalized or even killed. The corruption and violence became so extreme that Sodom and Gomorrah were unbearable not only to the righteous, but even to those accustomed to sinful living. Even Lot, who had chosen to live there because of its prosperity, realized that life in those cities was becoming unsustainable. The reversal of values was undeniable. What was right was seen as wrong, and what was wrong became normal. Anyone who dared to speak out against injustice was mocked or attacked. Hostility filled the streets, and respect for life was completely lost. The cruelty had become so extreme that Sodom and Gomorrah stood as true symbols of social decay. Corruption didn't just control institutions, it dominated the hearts and minds of the people. There was no longer any hope for those cities, and God's judgment was about to fall. If this story is already surprising you, just imagine what's coming next. So make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss content like this. And don't forget to leave a like to help this message reach more people. Genesis 19:24-25. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. Divine judgment came swiftly and powerfully. The spiritual corruption, violence, and total rejection of God's principles had reached a point of no return. The cities that once symbolized prosperity would now face the ultimate consequence: complete destruction. God sent 2 angels to Sodom to warn Lot and his family about the impending disaster. This visit was no coincidence. It was a final attempt to offer mercy and an opportunity for repentance. Yet despite the warning, many residents mocked the idea of destruction. Their arrogance blinded them to the danger they faced. The residents' attitude revealed how deeply they were lost in sin. They were so consumed by their wickedness that they couldn't even recognize the threat looming over them. The relentless pursuit of pleasure and power had hardened their hearts and clouded their judgment. Luke 17:28-30. It was the same in the days of Lot. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. This passage emphasizes that while Sodom and Gomorrah were drowning in immorality and violence, life seemed to carry on as usual. People ate, drank, conducted business, and went about their routines as if nothing could disrupt their lives. This false sense of security proved fatal. When destruction came, it was sudden and overwhelming. Fire and sulfur engulfed everything: homes, markets, streets, and even the once fertile fields that had made the region prosperous. The land that had symbolized abundance was reduced to a barren wasteland. The residents had no time to escape or repent. Those who had mocked the warnings were swept away by the sudden and devastating destruction. It was a judgment that was both final and inescapable. Genesis 19:26. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. This moment carries a powerful lesson. Even among those who were given a chance to escape, one person couldn't let go of her attachment to Sodom. Lot's wife looked back, symbolizing her lingering connection to the corrupt life she was leaving behind. Though her body was leaving the city, her heart still clung to it, and that hesitation cost her everything. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as a powerful example of what happens when moral and spiritual decay go unchecked. God's judgment wasn't impulsive or unjust. It was the inevitable result of a society that had utterly rejected truth and righteousness. 2 Peter 2:6. If he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, the Apostle Peter highlights that this tragedy wasn't just an isolated event in history. It serves as a warning to future generations, a reminder of what happens when sin dominates a society. Beyond the physical destruction, the story offers a profound spiritual message. No society can survive when built on corruption, violence, and selfishness. The fall of these cities is a clear warning that pride, greed, and the rejection of moral values inevitably lead to ruin. Yet even amid this destruction, one detail reveals God's mercy. Lot and his family were rescued. This act shows that God's justice is always paired with compassion. He doesn't bring judgment without first offering a way out to those willing to turn back to him. Lot's escape symbolizes hope, a reminder that even in the darkest situations, there's a path to salvation for those willing to choose it. God not only warned Lot, but also took him by the hand and guided him out, demonstrating his care for those seeking to live righteously. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't just an act of punishment, it was a warning meant to echo through generations. This story continues to remind us that ignoring moral principles leads to devastating consequences. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is more than a tale of destruction. It carries a powerful and timeless message. Beneath the tragedy lie valuable lessons that remain relevant today, encouraging us to reflect on our choices and way of life. 2 Peter 2:6. If he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. This verse emphasizes that Sodom and Gomorrah are not just symbols of the past. They stand as a warning to any society or individual that chooses to live selfishly, violently, and without restraint. Just as those cities ignored the warnings and plunged deeper into corruption, many today follow similar paths without realizing the risks. One of the key lessons from this story is that material wealth does not guarantee happiness or spiritual security. Sodom and Gomorrah were rich and prosperous, yet their wealth fueled arrogance and drew people away from the principles that truly matter: integrity, compassion, and righteousness. Another crucial lesson is the danger of normalizing sin. In Sodom and Gomorrah, immoral and violent behavior became so common that people no longer recognized the harm they were causing. This serves as a warning for modern times, where behaviors once seen as harmful are increasingly accepted or even celebrated. When evil is normalized, consequences become inevitable. Genesis 19:16. When Lot hesitated, the men grasped his hand and led him safely out of the city. This passage highlights another vital lesson: the danger of indecision in the face of wrongdoing. Lot knew Sodom was doomed, yet he still hesitated to leave. This shows how easy it is to become attached to destructive environments and behaviors, making it difficult to walk away. When we cling to harmful habits, relationships, or choices, we risk being consumed by the very things we should be escaping. Lot's wife offers yet another warning. By looking back, she showed her reluctance to leave behind her old life. This serves as a reminder that holding on to destructive patterns can prevent us from moving forward. True change requires leaving the past behind and trusting God's guidance. The story also emphasizes the importance of heeding warnings. Sodom and Gomorrah were warned, yet they mocked those trying to save them. This highlights the risk of ignoring wise advice, whether it comes from friends, family, or even our own conscience. Refusing to listen often leads to regrettable outcomes. Finally, the destruction of these cities shows that while God is merciful, He is also just. There comes a point when persistent wrongdoing leads to unavoidable consequences. However, God always offers a way out to those who seek Him, a truth demonstrated in Lot's rescue. Lot's deliverance reminds us that even in the midst of chaos and corruption, those who choose to live with integrity can find hope and protection. The tragic fall of Sodom and Gomorrah underscores a powerful truth: our daily choices shape our future. Small compromises, if repeated, can push us down a path that's difficult to escape. But no matter how far we've strayed, there's always time to turn back and make better choices. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah marked a pivotal moment in history, but more importantly, it serves as a reminder that there's always time to change and seek God. If this video helped you, be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you won't miss future content. And don't forget to leave a like to help this message reach more people. Now tell me in the comments, what surprised you most about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? I'd love to hear your thoughts. God bless you,